Hi, I am Pratim Ranjan Bose, and you are watching Podcast with Pratim, presented by Iravati Research and Communication Center, or ISCC. In this edition, we will discuss India's key takeaways from G7 meeting, which has just been over, the changing political landscape in Europe, where right-wing parties are witnessing a surge in support, and what are India's key challenges on external affairs front in the next 5 years. I have with me Ambassador Anil Trigunayat, India's former envoy to Jordan, Libya, and Malta. Ambassador has long experience of working across continents, including USA and Russia. Welcome to my show, sir.
Thank you, Pratimji. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Sir, let me start with a question that might sound a little awkward. What is G7 really? An American club, a truncated version of NATO that dictates terms on the rest of the world? It is not a conglomerate of top economies now that it has kept Russia out again. Otherwise, India and China should have been there as permanent members. Over to you, sir.
Well, I think it is all in all the epithets that you have given. But if you were to go back to the 1973 oil crisis, when the Arab countries had blockaded, oil supplies to the rest of the world, that caused a very major crisis in the West also at the same time. And therefore, the six countries' leaders met in order how to, contain this. Eventually, it was resolved. But then this became a club of informal club, actually, I would say, of the seven advanced economies. Now, these economies, even though in terms of GDP size, may be somewhat less, but they remain important countries because at least three of them are in the UN Security Council. They are nuclear powers also. One is a hyperpower, United States, which has the capacity to operate all across the world, the largest economy in the world. Of course, in the last few years, the pivot is changing. And the pivot is changing towards South, which means especially the economic pivot. And as China is beginning to challenge I would say, the superiority of the Western world and Western model, in particular the liberal international order, we are looking at the G7 trying to reassert itself in a way where it can have a joint position on several issues. Now, it is not to say that the G7 has been always a sacrosanct institution. It has played its dirty cards also by following unilateral mechanisms all over the world, various invasions, and the more and more problems that have occurred are as a result of those interventions. At the same time, they continue to keep focus on the major global and regional challenges, including the economic challenges that have been caused currently by the three major, I would say, which are simultaneously operating, which are like black swan events in a way. And that is the pandemic, which is continuing to impact most of the world, even today. Then you have the Russia-Ukraine war, which has tried to create a very major sea change in the global emergence of the global order, new global order that will come. A lot will depend on what happens to the Russia-Ukraine war. And then you have Israel-Hamas war, which also has a potential of a greater escalation in the region, which could once again impinge on the supply of energy and various other routes, as we have seen recently. So therefore, these challenges were very important. On top of it, there are other challenges. For example, the artificial intelligence. Now, everybody wants to use it, but is also scared of it because it could take over. So how to regulate it was a very major challenge. India is a major country. And similarly, energy security, as I mentioned, the climate change, which remains a global challenge. So these are the issues that were discussed during this. But more importantly, this also was happening just as a precursor to the peace summit for the Ukraine that President Zelensky wanted, and most of the European countries and the USA have been supporting it, and which was also followed after that. So there were these major issues that were focused on. It is not something that if it says or it issues a communique or a joint statement, that a statement is going to be implemented. It is more, in a way, a directional kind of a thing. It is indicative of the way they are thinking and how they are going to use their transatlantic efforts to impinge on various issues.
I agree. I agree. The only problem is that as you said, there is a hyperpower. There are superpowers kind of stuff. So, and there is no contradiction, apparent contradiction in the character of the members. So it's kind of a free hand to a group of nations who, if they are saying that this is correct, and that is the question, that whether G7 is for democracies or not for democracies, or their version of democracies. Now, you rightly mentioned about AI, and Prime Minister Modi spoke on AI and access to energy. Now, the second one is access and availability of energy. The second one is very critical. It hurts from rich to poor, everyone, but more the poor. Now, the stand of G7 has been hypocritical, to say the least, on this issue. They went after India in the context of the Russia-Ukraine war. They went after India for purchasing cheap crude from Russia. Remember, India was just recovering from the pandemic shock. And then the same nations stepped up their purchases of refined oil products from India. Germany was a top buyer and a top critic. And this G7 has been the prime mover between behind this coal phase out issue. And they are now backtracking on that, or are kind of taking umbrage under different words and narratives to reduce the scope. So how should we deal with these powers?
Well, unfortunately, the hypocrisy and the double standards have virtually been the norm of the Western countries. And so, therefore, when we are looking at these liberal international order, which they themselves had introduced, founded, is floundering today. And the reason is a lot of credit goes to them because they always preach something else and practice something else. So that is very well known to the world. And that's why they are currently being challenged by China and Russia in their as an all different kind of an alternative for global governance, which is coming out today. And but so what they are trying to do today is they are trying to retrieve the situation as far as they can. So this is a joint effort. It is not that they agree on everything. There are differences between various European countries and the US on the way how to approach things, to what extent. For example, their positions in Russia-Ukraine war and the position in the Israel-Hamas war, in many cases, are diametrically opposite. And they are on the same issue. They will take very different positions. So I think that this is why the trust in their system is becoming increasingly wide. On the other hand, you mentioned about the energy security. You see, this energy security is very important, but we have to step back a little and look at the way this Russia-Ukraine war has changed the whole gamut of relationship. I treat it as a 4F syndrome. And it started with the weaponization of financial instruments by West and the US. When they cut out Russia from the SWIFT and confiscated its money, which $50 billion of which is being given to Ukraine now at this last G7 summit, which is a big headline for Russia, obviously. And then most of the world, including the Western world, started having questions that if tomorrow we are not agreeing to the US for some reason, we might be met with the same fate. So that is a problem which is there. So what did Russia do? Russia weaponized the 3Fs, the remaining fuel, fertilizer, and food. It is a major player in all those. And then we are seeing the whole impact on the rest of the world. especially the global south, the poorer countries. And there is a voice of the poor countries at the G7, that is India. So that is why I called this G7. This was the 11th time we were called. Prime Minister Modi was there the 5 times. This is the 5th time. And India has also tried to bring about some kind of a sanity to the discourse, I would say, or trying to balance it out a little bit so that they don't have just a unifocal view of the Western world and without thinking about the West. In this case, I must compliment the Italian Prime Minister that she also had a good focus on the South. And therefore, we see that she invited 12 countries and all that. Now, and India, I don't see G7 today as G8, or people like to call different ways, but I see it as a G7+1. It is in that context I look at it. And India has become a sort of a permanent fixture because the Western countries, especially the United States, and whose National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, is here today in Delhi, also looks at India as a major partner and a pivot for its Indo-Pacific strategy in countering China. India has a different approach to it, but that is what they look at it. And that's where India's importance as a major partner in the global value supply chains, which they consider more credible, is equally important. And that's why India is being sought out, apart from being the largest democracy, the fastest growing major economy, the 5th largest economy. Today, India's GDP per capita income, not per capita, but the GDP income today is more than the 4 G7 countries.
Right, right.
What we are trying to, India's approach has been that the interests, whether it was our G20 presidency, other international organizations, or in the G7, India always pleads for and advocates for the cause of the global south and the developing countries.
You mentioned about the Italian Prime Minister who has been bringing some kind of sanity to the things. Now, she represents the right, and the right is surging in Europe. Prime Minister Modi is just elected for another 5-year term. Should that give India some kind of breather? Will it be easier for India to deal with the right?
I don't think so. I mean, I think that those are all passing phases. The governments keep on changing. In all these countries, you have coalition governments. The Europe is going to remain with coalitions all the time. But rightist governments are taking precedence because of their own policies that they have followed. As you know, the immigration has been one of the biggest challenges and issues in all these countries, whether it is UK sending people to Rwanda, as you know, or the Italians trying to fight these immigrants coming from Africa, or other European countries facing same kind of problems.
Sooner than later, probably their veneer of liberal things will break.
Yeah. Well, we will have to see how it eventually plays out. But this remained. I mean, when the European Union was being done, then people used to talk about, including when they were taking in Poland, they always used to be fearful of the Polish plumber, So they knew that the jobs would be taken and all. Likewise, we are seeing it everywhere that there is a sort of I would say, a reaction to the immigration. They are not being seen by many countries as a kind of repository of intellect and talent, but as a burden for them or taking away their jobs. In the long, they forget that they are having this problem with their own population, declining populations in all these European countries. That's why they'll have to find a way which is mutually beneficial. But coming to your question is, as far as India is concerned, it is not a breather for us. Our relations with XYZ country is not increased because of they are rightist or they are leftist or this. They are because what is the India as a big opportunity is. You see, they look at India not in terms of run by rightist country. In fact, the maximum criticism of Prime Minister Modi's government is coming from the Western countries,
right.
In the elections. So I don't see it as a major asset from the part of India. But they know that where India is heading today, because everything will depend on how strong economically we'll grow, how developed we'll become, how strong we become in terms of technology. That will decide the way the other countries will interact with us.
So economic growth has been at the center of all these things, and as it was in
That
the
is true.
past with regard to China.
Yes,
Uh,
absolutely.
Now, having done so, or that being so, there is an issue: is whether the democratic West is more aggressive to us, more aggressive to India as a democracy, when compared to its role or attitude towards China in its growing days. We are quite a few years or decades behind China, so we are growing. China has grown between 1978 and 2008 at a very high speed. So their attitude then and today with India, whether that is I'm just drawing your attention to a couple of things during this election season. One is some Israeli firm is trying to interfere in Indian election using OpenAI platform. Then US, Australia, and Canada are raising issues about India's spy agencies. These all were happening over the last couple of months. Sustained pro-Khalistan activities in Canada. So how do you look at these things in view of as you said, that our growth, India has to grow, India has to maintain its momentum. So how do you look at these things?
Well, number one is, um, in our growth story, we will have partnerships and we will have roadblocks. Roadblocks will mostly come from those countries, because some in the United States also feel that what they have idealistic approach they had towards China, which enabled China to be so big that today it is challenging them. It should not happen with India. Some in the West have that kind of an approach. In a democracy, it is much more easier to criticize, and it is easier to influence through the gray zone warfare. And what the examples you gave were exactly part of that toolkit, talking about your human rights, your democracy deficit, your freedom for this, for that. Those are the issues that keep coming in. I have a different solution for that. But as far as the economic growth of India is concerned, today the Western countries especially have to look at India as the voice of the global South, number one. An economy that is bound to become number two or number three very soon, not 20, 30 years is not a very long time. The country which has the largest democracy, which has shown to the world that democracy delivers. So that is very much there. Now, in this case, one thing that they don't seem to like, in my view, is a strong leadership. And that we have seen in the past from our independence down to today, that the countries in the West somehow are not able to accept the fact that India can have its own foreign policy, can also talk strongly, and can take views independently, irrespective of their centric concerns. So I think that this is something that's why they come up with these kind of situations and try to weaken the system. It becomes far more available to the common people, because we are a democracy. So these gets reported. And this last 6, 7 years before the elections, precisely that kind of a game plan played out from the Western countries. As far as the question of the Nizars and Pannuns and all those Khalistani separatists is concerned, I always say that they are essentially hypocrites. Hypocrites in the sense and double standards. They believe in my terrorist versus your terrorist. If it is my terrorist, he can do no wrong. If it's your terrorist, we will go to Afghanistan and destroy the whole country. We will go to Iraq and regime change. We will change the people. So we can do that because we are the most powerful country in the world. On the other hand, a country like India, where it is even though we have not done it, but at the same time, what you are trying to do is trying to, under the garb of that citizenship, which was also in a way illegally obtained, you are now trying to show to the world that, okay, you have no right to eliminate them, instead of saying that we will eliminate them or we will do something about that. They don't do that. They will tell you, oh, we want to fight. I mean, you are aware that until 9/11 happened, they never cared about terrorism coming from Pakistan into India all through.
Never.
It is only after 9/11 that it was talked about.
Historically, probably India is the worst sufferer of terrorism for too long decades.
Like for 40, 50 years now.
Yeah.
And they don't care. Even now they play games. It's not there. So when you do these kind of things, I mean, see, if they're Khalistani separatists, they are there. Give them a land, make the country there for themselves. If you are so happy about it, give California to the Sikhs. They can make their own Khalistan there. Or Canada can give its own areas, but they have a lot of land. I create these kind of people because, see, this is not only India. I was ambassador to Libya. All the people there who they brought back eventually after dislodging Gaddafi were all given as the patronage by CIA and others. So it is a well-known fact. So the regime change is very much a part of the agenda. So when a particular regime or a leader doesn't serve their purpose, you create all kinds of things to do that. So I think that we will have to prepare for it. What I'm trying to say is that this is a reality which will continue to play out again and again, over and over again. So in order to go forward and move forward at the pace that India wants to be, we'll have to make our own toolkits, our own strategies, and especially the communication strategy.
That's a very interesting statement. India needs to have its own toolkits. Sir, you said about you harped on the very basic issue about the lack of trust of the democratic world on the democratic West, quote unquote. Because, as you said, it is your terrorists versus my terrorists, your problems versus my problems, So I think Foreign Minister has also harped on the same point. Now, look at what is happening with regard to US-China and the trade relations. It was the US who championed for free trade under WTO guidance. It was the US which roped in US and its allies, or the West has roped in with the garlanded China's entry into WTO. Today, they are against both. President Joe Biden was initially considered soft to China. Now, during the election season, he has joined the rhetoric against China. Now, there is one line of thought, or there are some proponents who feel that if President Biden is re-elected, the US deep state will work for a patch up with China. They will once again move in that direction, and that will eventually or necessarily weaken India-US relationship, the Quad, Indo-Pacific, or whatever. So what is your opinion?
Well, I think that what I feel is that the Biden administration broadly followed the same policies as that of President Trump, or even earlier. They have realized that China is going to be replacing United States eventually. If China continues to remain on track or does not have an implosion within. So as long as the China in the current form continues, it will eventually catch up with West. West has declining momentum, especially Europe. And United States also is facing problems. The gap is decreasing. I saw a chart recently. G7 countries used to be in 2000 about 46, 47% of the global GDP. Today, they have come down to 29%. Now, you can imagine where is the rest going? This is China, India, and other places. So what is the economy going to be used to enhance your effectiveness and technology, which is going to reign supreme tomorrow? And China is investing very heavily, and that is why the US is trying to break China's acquisition of new technologies or collaborations, something like that. At the same time, I don't see that either side is looking for a major conflagration. And the reason is simple, that it is unaffordable because of the Russia-Ukraine war today. So they are, for the moment, trying to work out some kind of a solution, which is competition with cooperation. So certain areas you cooperate, other areas you are competing. You are putting sanctions on China, Chinese bank, Chinese do sanctions. So, but what it has led to, it has led to more localization, regionalization. Groups like BRICS becoming more important. Shanghai Cooperation Organization. China and Russia are focusing on this. And that is why I say that shape of things of to come is very likely to be a Cold War 2.0 kind of a scenario with a great difference, qualitative difference, structural differences, but in a geopolitical manner. Geoeconomically, we may see many centers of economic power here and there. But the geopolitical centers, we are looking at something called Cold War 2.0, and which is very much in play in my view. But as I say, that the end of the Russia-Ukraine war eventually, what is the outcome of it, will also have a telling impact on how it's going to happen. You know, dollarization, de-dollarization is a very major challenge today for the Americans and for the West as well, because more and more countries are today going towards their bilateral national currencies or mechanisms that are being worked out, alternate mechanisms are being worked out. And that is something that is going to play out now in this sense. So I think that China is a challenge for them, but I must say China is a very big challenge for India in every geography.
Yes, yes. So, in fact, de-dollarization, I think Saudi Arabia took a decision, right, just recently about oil sales. And that is one thing that that we are looking up to, where it is heading, as you said, in the in the Russia-Ukraine war case. Now, sir, the last question, the election results in India, does it have any bearing on our worldview or the way the world looks at us? Because in the end, it's all about power game, which you say. So we had a live agenda of increasing our stake in the Middle East. We discussed in another episode with you about India's plan to get into more and more port operations. We just saw a report in a newspaper report that India may be interested in operating Mongla port. I don't know, in Bangladesh. I don't know how right or wrong the report is, but there was a report. Now, is there any or will the election result have any bearing on our on these things?
Well, if you come to think of it broadly, in the past 75 years, if you were to look at it, irrespective of the governments, the foreign policy, in a sense, has remained very on the same track. It is the operational dimension of the foreign policy which has changed a great deal. The emphasis on certain dimensions, on certain aspects. In Modi's 10 years, I say that the biggest challenge to the previous systems, I would say, was, or the change was, that it has become more robust, a more resilient foreign policy, and result-oriented foreign policy. So this is something that is very important, which has become, as far as India is concerned, under Prime Minister Modi, a strong leader, strong governments. They tend to benefit your foreign policy goals. There's no doubt about it. We have a coalition government. But as far as the major issues of our foreign policy concerned, I don't think there is any debate about that. So they will continue to remain in focus irrespective of that, which we have already seen in operation. What Prime Minister Modi did in 2014, invited all the leaders from this neighborhood. He invited this time also the leaders from the neighborhood, minus Pakistan and Afghanistan, for obvious reasons. That shows that your neighborhood first policy is of primary importance to you. 2 days later, he flies out to G7, talks to the most powerful countries there, and many other countries from Middle East and from other places, leaders, which shows that it's a leader, it's a country that is present and ready to deal with the world on its own terms. That shows it. Today you are here and you have the Sheikh Salman. 2 days later, Sheikh Hasina is again coming. Once again, the focus is there. Prime Minister Modi also met the UAE president there. So what I'm trying to say is that, and there will be a Shanghai Cooperation Organization meeting in July. So there will be again. So the agenda, as far as foreign policy is concerned, is very simple. core of the foreign policy agenda is how to make India into a developed India, like Viksit Bharat, as they call it. And so for that, several things will be needed. Greater investment, better technologies, greater R&D, more production at home as Atmanirbhar Bharat, and also the collaborations, and most importantly, prevailing of peace for a significant period of time. These are very important.
So, if I get you correctly, is that the way we were moving, right, from sailing BrahMos to Philippines to taking over operations at Chabahar, the result-oriented part of the foreign policy. So that will be the direction of the government, and how it happens is to be looked into. Thank you, sir. Thank you for giving us.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Namaskar.